Hey everybody, Dan Holstein here, helping your business take flight, and I'm delighted today to be having a conversation with Jim Friesen from Portage M&A Advisory. And Jim is an expert in the field of mergers and acquisitions and helping bring buyers and sellers of businesses together. So welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, happy to. So here we are in the end of April 2020, and we're in the midst, or 6 or 7 weeks into this whole COVID situation. And I'm sure that there's business owners that had the best laid plans of having their business ready for sale, ready to go, and then this all hits. So what are you seeing in the marketplace in terms of what's happening to the business owners that were in that sale process with what's going on with COVID?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's really it's hard to say, what's happening with business one is happening with business two. It really depends on the industry and it depends on the business owner and the appetite of the buyer. But for the most part, what I would say is there's been a bit of a wait and see approach. So, for example, for a transaction that was midway, there was a letter of intent or an offer on the table. What we're seeing people do is say, especially on the buy side, is saying, you know what, we don't know what the next few months are going to look like. We've seen forecasts, we have an idea,
Yeah, yeah.
but before things normalize, let's continue on through the due diligence process, but let's not pull the trigger until there's a little bit more certainty. And I think really that's driven by, a lot of the advisors on the banking side. The bank wants to know what the new normal is going to look like. And obviously the buyer wants to make sure they know what they're getting after we come through this.
Right. So it's that all this again. It comes down to there's this uncertainty. So if the banks are uncertain, then they're not going to fund, which means the buyer's pool is going to have some challenges as well as the people trying to sell their businesses.
Absolutely. It's interesting though. I mean, we're getting a lot of calls from individuals, and there are a lot of folks that follow Warren Buffett and believe, hey, now's a good time to look at some opportunities. The market has obviously deterred a fair amount of buyers,
Mm-hmm.
people who perhaps weren't, let's call them A grade buyers. Perhaps they've run away and they're looking at preserving their own capital, looking at their own businesses. But you do get these interested individuals coming to the table saying, hey, we're still open, we're still looking. Now's a good time for us to look and see what's going on in the market. In fact, what we're telling people too is now's a great opportunity to see whether or not the business can actually go through this time frame. It's a bit of a stress test. If they can make it through this time frame, I would say you probably have a pretty good business on your hands.
That makes a lot of sense. That if they're strong enough to make it through, weather this particular storm, that they would be a valuable asset for someone to add to their portfolio because the business works well and is profitable.
Absolutely. And the other piece that we're seeing too is the business owners that, are really dialed in and are really cognizant of what's going on around them. They're not sitting on their hands. They're looking around and they're saying, what are some other ways we can generate revenue? There's a cleaning company here in Niagara, and I've been really impressed with how quickly they've adapted to the situation. They started using Chamber of Commerce advertisements. They've
Mm-hmm.
changed their services, are now tailored toward, sanitizing and ensuring that germs and this sort of thing are cleaned up. So the response was immediate, and they're trying to preserve as much revenue as they possibly can. And the folks who I think put their head in the sand and say this is not really happening, they're going to come out of this and they're going to be in a disadvantaged situation. So I think some people are very keen and they're adapting. Their business is agile enough to adapt. And then others are saying, you know what, we're not sure what's going on. Let's take a wait and see approach. And so I think at the end of all of this, you're going to see a lot of different businesses emerge.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see the innovation that comes out of this situation, right? The ability to adapt. And it's for the folks that were sitting on their hands, like you mentioned at the beginning. It's not unusual when you have something sort of shocking like this, where you can't believe it at first. It's like, what? The economy is shutting down, and then it's, well, what are we going to do? And that whole sort of panic sets in, and people get sort of stuck and they don't feel like they can move forward. They don't know what to do. So I could see unfortunately, there's going to be some casualties that are going to come out of this. But I think the businesses that do make it out, they will be stronger for it. And they're also going to there could be some businesses that aren't doing so well, but have perhaps some strategic value in purchasing. So maybe the businesses that come out okay would go shopping, for a strategic purchase. Are you in a case like this? Are you seeing certain businesses that are more saleable than others? Do you feel there's others that are going to be harder hit and more difficult to bring to market?
It's interesting you say that. I think, the ones that fit in the essential services categories, they're still running, maybe at a reduced revenue. There are some that are actually up on revenue. So, I mean, those are appealing because you still know what business activity looks like. The ones that were forced to shut down, you know, fundamentally, they could be very strong businesses, but, when they're not generating revenue, it's hard to anticipate if it's going to bounce back to historical levels.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I would say the essential businesses are easier to measure and follow right now. Um, the engagements that we had that were, going through the process of sale, most of those continue to operate. We've had one that was forced to shut down. The way the buyer is looking at that particular opportunity is, hey, it's a great business, but unfortunately, we have no indicators as to, what the future is going to hold for that business. We can speculate, but there's no data that we can rely upon. So the ones that are currently open are adjusting. They have numbers to report. They have indicators. I think they can provide buyers with a pretty good sense of, hey, this is how agile we are. This is how we're responding. The business looks appealing, but unfortunately, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better business. It's just one of the businesses that was on the list of essential businesses.
Yeah, yeah. So with this whole, there's just different stages of people's business lives, right? There's the entrepreneurial startup stage, there's the growth stage, there's maturity, and then there's the exiting stage. Do you think that with what's gone on and the uncertainty that's been created, that's going to lead more business owners to jump to that exit stage earlier than they might, to kind of make sure that once things clear up that they've cashed out for their asset and sold?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we're still trying to understand where people's heads are at, because I think there are a couple of camps here. One is, if you're a business owner and you're nearing retirement, I think some of the folks are getting frustrated with another challenge that they have to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard from some folks saying, you know what, we don't know how long this is going to take. I don't want to weather the storm for 2 years. I'm thinking of closing the doors and just exiting. And we're trying to send out the message that that's not the best strategy. If you can hang on, preserve the value, business will eventually get back to the new normal. Especially considering the industry that they're in, obviously. But if they can just weather the storm, there are lots of buyers looking for quality businesses. So closing the doors really does eliminate their opportunity to capture some of the value of their business. Some of the other folks, they look at this as an opportunity. They see their competitors, putting their heads in the sand. They likely can emerge and perhaps capitalize on some more market share. So they're going to come out of this guns a-blazing. They're going to invest more. And they really, they look at it as an example to show investors and buyers the true value of their business. And they're hoping that, after things return back to normal, this is really going to bode well for them.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're sitting there with your head in the sand, not taking any action, the whole world's going to pass you by, right? And things aren't going to get easier, aren't going to get better. I mean, that's part of the advice I'm giving all the business owners that I deal with as well, is make sure you're moving forward, have a bit of a plan, take action relentlessly, and look for the opportunities. And there's, the old, the kanji characters for the word crisis, or pardon me, crisis in Chinese, it's danger. And people say it's opportunity, but it's actually change point. So it's danger and change point. So it's like, what's the point in your business that you need to change? And that's sort of how we're guiding people to look at things right now as well. And some of that could be change it to get it ready for sale as well. You've gone through this, and it's, my 3-year vision to be out is now a 5-year vision to be out. And so we have to change and adapt. So what are you seeing, Jim, as some of the most important things a business owner can do to get their business in a, ready for sale that would be attractive to a buyer?
Yeah, so even if they're caught in this situation, I think I mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a stress test. So, recording the initiatives that you've undertaken through the process. What are some of the steps you've put in place? Obviously you had a strategic plan. You're going to have to adapt that strategic plan. So how agile is the business to adapting? Record the initiatives, record the effectiveness of these initiatives, and put a new plan in place. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how quickly things are going to return back to normal, but now's the time to gather as much information at your disposal, maintain a healthy culture, do what you can to prepare for the rebound. Preparing for the sale oftentimes takes at least a couple of years. Now's not a bad time. I mean, there's a bit of a stress component. So put some initiatives in place, try to get back to that new normal, ensure that you retain key staff, ensure that your processes are still being followed when appropriate. A lot of people are talking about marketing and the opportunity now to perhaps enhance their social media. Marketing is a big piece with social isolation. How do you get the word out there? Perhaps jumping on video and doing something similar to this. There are opportunities. It's easy to look at the doom and gloom, but I prefer to look at, hey, how can we adapt? How can we change things? How can we move things forward? So in a way, it's forcing people to adjust and adapt. And if their competition isn't adapting, this could put them further ahead. So really, it's just starting this strategic planning process all over again, and keeping your eyes open, trying to maintain a level of normal, even though it's not easy, and just trying to anticipate and adapt.
Like you mentioned, tightening up processes and things like that. This is, for some businesses, if their business has dropped off a little bit, they'll have the time to do that. Whereas it's all the little projects where you're too busy to get at them. Well, that excuse is kind of gone for most business owners at this point. There are things that they could be working on in their business, right? Well, this has been great. Really appreciate it, Jim. So thanks so much for your advice. And if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Email would be the best, or if they search our website, so www.portagemaadvisory.com. And thanks again for having me, Dan. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Jim. All right. Catch you soon.